Dad said, "You'll never make it without my money." I left home with nothing but a laptop. 10 years later, Forbes named me Entrepreneur of the Year. When Dad called, begging for help after bankruptcy, I said, "Remember when you said I'd never make it?" I didn't plan to leave that night. I didn't even pack a bag. But when Dad said those words, sharp, final, like a slammed door, I knew I couldn't stay another minute. "You'll never make it without my money." He said it like a curse. Like a prophecy. And maybe he believed it. Maybe part of me did too. But I wasn't going to let him be right. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the old wall clock. Mom stood in the kitchen doorway, her hands trembling around a dish towel. She didn't say anything. She never did when he got like that. I walked past her, grabbed my laptop from the dining table and slipped on my sneakers. No coat. No charger. Just the clothes on my back and the fire in my chest. Outside the air was cold and sharp. I walked for hours not really knowing where I was going. I ended up at a 24-hour diner on the edge of town. I ordered a coffee I couldn't afford and sat in the corner booth, staring at the screen of my dead laptop. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a kind smile, brought me a refill without asking. "Rough night," she said. I nodded. She didn't press. That first night I slept in my car. It was parked behind a gas station hidden from the main road. I curled up in the back seat using my backpack as a pillow. I didn't sleep much. Every sound made me jump. I kept thinking about Dad's face, how quickly it had turned from disappointment to disgust. I wondered if he was sitting in his recliner, sipping whiskey, already forgetting I existed. The next morning I drove to a friend's apartment. Jake and I had gone to college together. We weren't close, but he was the only person I could think of. He let me crash on his couch for a few nights. I tried to stay out of the way, left early, came back late, cleaned up after myself. But I could feel the tension building. On the fourth night he said, "Hey, I've got my girlfriend coming over this weekend. You think you could find somewhere else to stay?" I nodded. No hard feelings. I understood. That became the pattern. A few nights here, a few nights there. I learned to carry everything I owned in one bag. I learned which gas stations had clean bathrooms and which coffee shops didn't mind if you sat for hours with one drink. I learned how to stretch $1 and how to fake a smile. I took whatever work I could find. I handed out flyers in the rain. I cleaned offices after hours. I stocked shelves at a grocery store for minimum wage. I even tried dog walking, but one of the dogs bit me and I had to get a tetanus shot. That was a low point. One night I was scrolling through Craigslist on my cracked laptop, sitting in the corner of a noisy cafe. My fingers were numb from the cold. I saw an ad, urgent, need freelance website designer. One-time project. Quick turnaround. I clicked on it. The pay was decent. Enough to cover a week of food and maybe a cheap motel. I had no real experience, but I replied anyway. I told them I was an expert. I wasn't. I spent the next 3 days glued to my screen. I watched tutorials, read forums, and practiced until my eyes burned. I barely slept. I lived on coffee and granola bars. But I finished the project. I sent it off with a shaky hand and a silent prayer. The client replied within an hour. "This is amazing. I'm sending double." I stared at the message, not sure if I was hallucinating. When the payment came through, I cried. Not just because of the money, but because for the first time in weeks I felt like I had done something right. A few days later I was back at the same cafe working on another small project. My screen was flickering and the E-key had popped off. I was trying to fix a layout issue when a woman sat down at the table next to mine. She was older, maybe in her 60s, wearing a bright yellow scarf and carrying a tray of homemade sweets. She glanced at my screen and said, "Are you a designer?" I hesitated. "Sort of." She smiled. "I need a website for my spice shop. Can you help?" I said yes before she finished the sentence. Her name was Mrs. Patel. She owned a tiny shop tucked between a laundromat and a bakery. The place smelled like cinnamon and cardamom. She showed me her shelves of jars and tins, her handwritten labels, her old cash register. "I want the website to feel like this," she said. "Warm. Familiar." I worked on it for a week. She paid me in cash and food, samosas, chai, and a jar of mango pickle. When I showed her the final version, she hugged me. "My cousin needs a website too," she said. "I'll tell her about you." That one job led to 3 more. Then 5. Then 10. Word spread. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something. Slowly, painfully, but surely. That winter, I rented a tiny studio apartment. It was barely bigger than a closet, but it had a lock on the door and a heater that worked most of the time. I bought a second-hand desk and a folding chair. I hung a string of fairy lights above the window. It wasn't much, but it was mine. One night, I sat at that desk, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea. I opened a blank document and started writing a letter to Dad. I told him I was okay. That I didn't need his money. That I hoped he was well. I didn't mention the nights I went hungry or the times I cried myself to sleep. I didn't tell him about the Craigslist job or Mrs. Patel. I just said I was finding my way. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer. I never mailed it. I wasn't ready. Maybe I wanted him to wonder. Maybe I wanted to prove something. Or maybe I just needed to hold on to that piece of paper as a reminder of who I was becoming. Every time I doubted myself, I read that letter. It reminded me that I had walked away, not because I was weak but because I was done being underestimated. It reminded me that I had survived the worst and still found a way to keep going. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I'd ever speak to Dad again. But I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going back. Not to the house. Not to the business. Not to the version of me that needed his approval. That chapter was closed. And I was finally writing my own. The letter stayed in my drawer untouched, but something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. And the first brick of that foundation was a garage. Not the kind you see in glossy startup documentaries. This one was behind a laundromat, wedged between a dumpster and a wall stained with years of rain. The landlord gave me a discount because the heater didn't work and the roof leaked when it rained. I took it without hesitation. I remember the first night I worked there. It was January and my breath fogged the air as I typed. I wore 2 pairs of socks, a beanie and gloves with the fingertips cut off so I could still use the keyboard. The walls were bare concrete, and the only light came from a flickering desk lamp I'd found at a thrift store. But it was mine. I painted the walls a soft blue, hung a corkboard with scribbled ideas, and taped a sign above the desk, Headquarters. It was a joke at first. Then it became real. Clients started coming in slowly, mostly referrals from Mrs. Patel's network. I built websites for bakeries, yoga instructors, and even a local pet groomer who paid me in cash and dog treats. I didn't mind. Every project taught me something new. I kept a notebook where I wrote down every mistake, every lesson, every tiny win. That notebook became my Bible. After a few months, I realized I couldn't do it all alone. I needed help. I posted a job listing at the local college. Startup seeks coding assistant. Must be hungry to learn. Tasha replied the same day. She was 20, sharp-eyed and full of ideas. She reminded me of myself, except she still had a safety net. Her parents paid her rent. She had a warm apartment and a working laptop. But she wanted to build something too. The first week was magic. We worked side by side, bouncing ideas, fixing bugs, laughing over coffee breaks. She brought energy into the garage. I even bought a space heater, though it barely warmed our feet. But by the second month, the cracks started showing. I was intense, always pushing, always tweaking, never satisfied. Tasha began showing up late. She missed deadlines. One day, she forgot to back up a client's site and we lost everything. I didn't yell. I just sat there staring at the screen, trying to stay calm. She looked at me and said, "You're too intense. I can't breathe here." Then she packed her things and left. I sat on the floor for hours, staring at the empty chair. That night I cried. Not because she left, but because I wondered if Dad had been right. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this. But the next morning I made coffee, opened my notebook and wrote, "Learn to lead with grace." I didn't hire anyone else for a while. I needed to fix myself first. A few weeks later, I got a message from a local investor named Greg. He'd heard about my work and wanted to meet. We sat in a sleek office downtown, surrounded by glass walls and leather chairs. He listened as I pitched my idea, a platform to help small businesses build websites with drag-and-drop tools and personalized templates. He nodded, asked smart questions, and said, "Let me think about it." I left feeling hopeful. Maybe this was the break I needed. A month later, I saw a press release online. Greg Tech launches new platform for small businesses. I clicked the link. My idea. My words. My features. All under his name. I felt sick. I called him. He didn't answer. I emailed. No reply. I sat in the garage staring at the corkboard wondering if I should just quit. But then I remembered something Tasha said before she left. You're intense but you care. That was true. I cared too much to walk away. So I changed the model. I made it better. I added features he hadn't thought of. I focused on customer service, on real people, not just numbers. I launched quietly with no fanfare. 6 months later I had more users than he did. Still, the road wasn't smooth. One night I checked my bank account and saw $42. Rent was due in 2 days. My laptop crashed. I tried to fix it but the screen stayed black. I sat on the floor surrounded by wires and empty coffee cups, and cried until my chest ached. I thought about calling Dad. Just once. Just to ask for help. But then I remembered Mrs. Patel's smile. The Craigslist job. The letter in my drawer. I got up, walked to the public library and borrowed a computer. I stayed until closing, working on a proposal for a client I'd met weeks earlier. I sent it off, unsure if they'd even reply. The next morning I woke up to an email. We loved your pitch. Let's move forward. $5,000 deposit attached. I stared at the screen, blinking. That money saved me. It also reminded me that resilience isn't loud. It's quiet, stubborn, and relentless. 3 years passed in a blur of code, coffee, and client calls. I upgraded from the garage to a small office downtown. It had windows. Real chairs. A fridge. I hired a team, carefully this time. I learned to listen, to delegate, to breathe. I still worked late nights but I also took breaks. I even bought a plant. It died in a week but I tried. Then came the invitation. A tech conference in San Francisco. They wanted me to speak. I almost said no. I wasn't polished. I didn't have a degree or a fancy title. But I went. Standing on that stage looking out at hundreds of faces I felt something shift. I told my story, not the polished version but the real one. The garage. The $42. The betrayal. The tears. The wins. The losses. I spoke from the heart. Afterward, a young woman approached me. She looked nervous, clutching a notebook. I just wanted to say, you made me believe I could do this too. Her voice cracked. I hugged her. That moment stayed with me. It wasn't about proving Dad wrong anymore. It wasn't even about building a business. It was about showing people, especially the ones who'd been told they couldn't, that they could. I walked off that stage with a full heart. Not because I'd made it, but because I'd made it matter. I stepped off the stage with applause still ringing in my ears, but my heart was quiet. The tech conference had been a milestone, yes, but it wasn't the moment that changed everything. That came a few weeks later on a Tuesday morning when my assistant Maya burst into my office mid-meeting, her face flushed and her phone trembling in her hand. You need to take this, she said, breathless. I raised an eyebrow. Can it wait? She shook her head. It's Forbes. I blinked. Forbes. They're naming you Entrepreneur of the Year. I laughed. Not a polite chuckle, a full, disbelieving laugh. You're joking. She wasn't. They flew me to New York the following week. The interview was surreal. Bright lights, makeup artists, stylists fussing over my collar. I sat in a sleek chair answering questions about grit, resilience, and innovation. I spoke about the garage, the sleepless nights, the clients who paid in food. I didn't mention Dad. Not once. When the magazine hit shelves, my face was on the cover. I stared at it in the airport bookstore, unsure whether to feel proud or exposed. People recognized me. Strangers congratulated me. My inbox overflowed. But the message that stopped me cold came a week later. It was a voicemail. I was sorting through emails when I saw the missed call. The number was unfamiliar, but something told me to listen. I pressed play. Hey, it's me. I saw the article. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I need help. His voice cracked. He sounded smaller. Defeated. He paused, then added, I lost everything. The house. The business. I'm staying in a motel off Route 9. I didn't know who else to call. I sat there, phone in hand, frozen. I played the message again. And again. 5 times. Each time the words hit differently. Not like a punch. More like a slow unraveling. I hadn't spoken to Dad in nearly a decade. Not since the night I left. Not since he told me I'd never make it. And now here he was, asking for help. I didn't reply right away. I needed time. I walked around the block, bought a coffee I didn't drink, stared at the sky like it held answers. Part of me wanted to ignore him. To let him sit in that motel and think about everything he'd said. But another part, the part that still remembered his laugh, his old stories, the way he used to fix my bike, couldn't. So I called him back. We agreed to meet at a diner near his old office. It was the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and faded menus. I arrived early, sat by the window and waited. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. His shoulders were hunched, his suit wrinkled, his eyes tired. He tried to smile. "You look successful." I stirred my coffee. "You look different." He sat across from me, hands clasped. "I never thought I'd be the one asking you for help." I didn't speak right away. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, "Remember when you said I'd never make it?" He flinched. "I was wrong." I nodded. "Yes. You were." The waitress came by. He ordered toast and tea. I watched him fumble with the menu, his fingers trembling. He looked older than I remembered. Not just in years, but in spirit. "I made some bad choices," he said. "Invested in things I didn't understand. Trusted the wrong people. I thought I was untouchable. I didn't offer sympathy. I just listened. I don't expect you to fix it," he added. I need a job. Something to get me back on my feet." I leaned back. "I'm not giving you money." He nodded. "I didn't ask for money. I can offer you a job. Entry level. No special treatment." He hesitated. "Doing what?" "Customer support. Emails. Phone calls. The basics." He looked down at his tea. "I'll earn it." And he did. He showed up early. Stayed late. Took notes. Asked questions. He never once mentioned our past. Never asked for favors. He worked quietly, diligently, like a man rebuilding himself brick by brick. My team didn't know who he was at first. Just another new hire. But they noticed his manners, his patience, his humility. One day Maya pulled me aside and said, "That guy, he's different. In a good way." I smiled. "He's learning." We didn't talk much outside of work. But slowly the walls began to crack. He'd leave a sticky note on my desk. "Nice pitch in the meeting." I'd reply with a nod. He'd bring coffee on Mondays. I'd ask about his weekend. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. Steady. Healing. One afternoon I found him in the break room staring at a framed photo of our team. He turned to me and said, "I'm proud of you." I didn't know what to say. So I just said, "Thanks." That night I went home, opened my drawer and pulled out the letter I'd written 10 years earlier. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded. I read it slowly, line by line. Then I added a new sentence at the bottom. "Thank you for pushing me away. It made me who I am." I folded it, placed it in an envelope and walked to the mailbox. I stood there for a moment, fingers trembling, heart steady. Then I dropped it in. As the mailbox swallowed the letter, I felt something shift. Not because I'd won. Not because he'd lost. But because I'd let go. I walked home under a sky full of stars, thinking about the diner, the voicemail, the sticky notes. Thinking about how life twists and turns in ways we never expect. How sometimes the people who break us are the ones who help us rebuild. And how healing doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes with toast and tea.